Okay, so this is the conflict harmonizer, and it's a discussion all about shifting from conflict to harmony, because repairing conflict is a skill you can learn just like anything else. We want to understand it better, the causes and potential solutions, and then have a step-by-step system to achieve fair, honest, and helpful resolution when things break down, and get crystal clarity on what needs to happen next. And a big thing with conflict is to address the attitudes behind the actions. It's all about the attitudes behind the actions, because the actions themselves can be changed, but if there's no meaningful change under the surface, then the same types of problems just come out. So the first thing is just to have a good view about what conflict is, like a conflict rule. So, fill in the blank conflict is. We need to make sure that it's not a rule that makes us seek out excess conflict. We don't want to make sure it's not a rule that makes us avoid necessary confrontations. So we want to make sure that it gives a sense of security without provoking fear or anxiety, forward progress, sense of control, give us hope, and help us be the person we want to be. So sometimes people's conflict rules, a good one is that it's an opportunity to discover what we truly stand for and the reality other people are living in, and learn more about them and the skills to best get along. Beautiful conflict rule. Or it's an opportunity to set healthy boundaries and train other people how to treat us. Or it's worth the time and effort because the process helps us figure out the things we need to do to be okay and be better moving forward. Or, those are different good, healthy ways of looking at conflict. There's 3 general types of people when it comes to conflict. There's conflict-avoidant people. They're kind of like people pleasers, okay? And they try to avoid disappointing people. So they may even absorb blame and point fingers at themselves and let others off the hook, or they'll pacify and say, I'm sorry, instead of, standing their ground when they need to. Sometimes they stonewall, which is just like cutting off all contact or giving silent treatment. So that's some of the challenges of the conflict avoidant person. The key to success is to find the courage to let go of the outcomes and just do the right thing. Just do the right thing, let go of the outcomes. Ask, what will other people need to change if we're going to have change? Now, here's a quick 2-step system for conflict avoidant people. Okay. Step 1, you can express your need by saying, it's really important to me that, and then insert your need. Or you could say something like, instead of talking to me like this, or instead of handling the situation like this, would you be willing to consider doing this instead? Okay. So those are a couple ways just to express the need. And then step 2 is to find out how the need can best be met. You could say, how might we meet this need moving forward? And, if it can't be met, you can say, how can we manage this moving forward? The key for conflict avoidant people is to remember that it is a sign of maturity to ask for what you want. And if you avoid that, then you're not being truly authentic and honest. Okay, so that's kind of like the key thing. So it's just kind of like, hey, it's really important to me that, how might we manage this moving forward? It's kind of like just bringing it up. And we'll address in troubleshooting and stuff how you handle different reactions people might have to that request. Okay.
Sounds good.
Because different people will handle that differently. Okay. Now, the next part is conflict-seeking people. They're the confrontational types. Deep down, they're all about avoiding pain and maximizing their personal pleasure. And usually they have a view that they matter more than other people. So they usually think about themselves, and relationships are powership struggles to, stand up for yourself and take the power back, or prove you're right and others are wrong. And people in this mindset will swing between extreme highs and lows, thinking they are the best and then thinking they are the worst because they're not the best right now as they feel they should be, or whatever, right? So it's a lot of highs and lows emotionally. And they're ruled by the part of the psyche that is looking for stuff to be bothered by. They seek out strife so they can be hasty to judge and quick to condemn, right? Now, virtuous people will always give people the benefit of the doubt and be generous in their interpretation of other people. conflict seeking people tend to not have that skill mastered yet. So they will twist meaning out of things that were never meant that way. Their mind will seize on the wrong view of a subject. So, you know, if you say, hey, you look good today, they'll be like, hey, what are you saying? I didn't look good yesterday. Right? Or like if you say, hey, want to join me for a workout? They'll be like, what are you saying? I'm fat. I need to work out. Like, it's just kind of like they just constantly create the drama, or they'll blame people for their feelings. They'll say, you know, they might feel down and sad and blue, and then they'll blame it on a conversation you had 2 days ago instead of the fact that they ate expired yogurt, whatever, you know, like It's just kind of like they're looking for somebody to attack, right? And they stay stuck in their interpretation. So they're the kinds of people that they might have a conflict rule that, you know, conflict is all about a way to stand out for yourself, but really they're just intensifying their own egotistical perspective, or it's a way to protect myself by showing my strength and overpowering others. But once again, we're just intensifying the drama. The challenge of this category is lack of will to understand the underlying cause of their problems. Okay, they just don't want to, they resist understanding it. There's more time spent fighting to justify the way they are rather than fighting to understand and be better. Right? They fight to stay the same. So, but at the same time, with increasing emotional pain and suffering, life just never seems to go the way it's supposed to. And they may become emotional burn victims over time, perceiving threats and personal attacks everywhere, always looking for a fight. You know, Ryan Holiday in the book Ego is the Enemy, he talks about, you know, it's like they're saying we have to stand up for ourselves, right? But really, it's just the ego escalating tension more than dealing with the tension. So anyway, a key to success for this group, a big key is to spend time with trustworthy and dependable groups, institutions, and people. Surround yourself with good influences, okay? Rather than people that just strengthen you in your negative judgments. And rather than people that just justify and enable the dysfunctional ways in which you're thinking and acting. And continue to reinforce that that's the wrong way is the right way, right? So that's step one, is really getting into good influences. And then step two is mindful self-awareness. So just impartially observing the part of your mind that looks for stuff to be bothered by. Notice how it operates. It creates problems where no problems exist, right? And then, you know, ask yourself, when those thoughts come up, ask yourself, why is it a bad idea to think this way? Really challenge those thoughts that get you worked up. Don't blindly accept them, challenge them. And then just say, you know, what's a better way to look at this? Or what's the empowering truth? Right? A lot of this comes down to, this category is often ruled by human pride, which makes people emotionally sensitive and easily offended. Humility makes people very tough and resilient. Okay, so we got to ask ourselves, what's the price we pay for human pride? Is it worth it? When do we realize that the ego trip is a bad trip? When is it time for humility hygiene? Right? So there is, and you know, some of our discussions will address that, how to drop the ego and embrace more humility. So now for other people who aren't conflict avoidant, one thing I heard Tim Ferriss say once is that if you want to avoid conflict, do not associate with people who are always in conflict. Right? So,
yep.
Have you ever noticed that? And people who are always complaining about conflicts, and then the next thing you know, they're creating a conflict with you.
Yeah. Yes. I can think of a few times.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to just understand the way that works. Now, at that point, when people are conflict seekers, they think, a part of them thinks conflict is a good idea. Like conflict all the time, right? Yeah. So they haven't learned how to temper that. It can be a strength, but it could be a strength in excess. They haven't learned how to temper it yet, right? So now, conflict avoidant people, category one, they can be often very externally validated. So they're very big on what other people think of them. Hence, they avoid conflict. Now, Category
Yeah.
3 is conflict harmonizers. They're very internally validated. Okay, so they're not prone to, being as concerned about impressions of other people. They're not as concerned about bruised pride and ego. They're more focused on virtue and how to harmonize the conflict in their life and not let it bring them down, right? It's kind of like a dog. Like if you get mad at a dog, it'll just leave you alone. It'll wait for you to come back to your senses, which is what a conflict harmonizer will often do, right? And a lot of times people will interpret their experiences through the prism of a spiritual role model or leader's teachings. So a lot of times they will try to process it through the way like Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or somebody else might process their challenges. As a result, they're often quick to harmonize conflict by embracing the unlearned lessons and learning and growing from it and choosing the path of virtue. So very much it's filtering it through this higher lens is what they'll do. Now, the main challenge is to always never put speed of resolution ahead of quality of resolution. So sometimes people want to harmonize conflict and they try to do a haphazard resolution, reconciliation, which is never really solving anything. It's almost like bypassing, right? It's just kind of like somebody gives a really crappy apology. They clearly aren't really remorseful. They're probably apologizing because they've learned that if you just say those words, you will get rewards, right? They haven't truly had a heart change. And the key is that that's not really a reconciliation yet. So we don't want to compromise our principles to make peace, right? We have to adhere to truthful principles. So, and make peace with the fact that sometimes you can use the best form in conflict resolution and it's not going to harmonize the way you might have hoped or expected. Sometimes people just have to live through hard experience. And sometimes people will never be easy to deal with as long as they remain at their current state of development. And if they're fighting to stay at their current stage of development instead of embracing their unlearned lessons, then there's going to be a lot of collateral damage if you're in their vicinity, right? Emotionally, or sometimes even physically, depending on the nature of the situation. Now, an analogy I heard once is that sometimes people are like love dragons. Okay, so, if you have a dragon, you can get close, but it'll probably burn you. Okay, so you need to love it at a distance, either emotionally or physically. So is the case with many people in our lives. Like we just need to keep a healthy distance from them, and that might be the way to harmonize. Right. So, the main solution here is to keep remembering your situational role model for this category. Like, who do you look up to? Who is worth role modeling in this area? How would they respond to the situation? How can we be like them? It's remembering those situational role models. So, of these 3 categories, which kind of person do we want to be? What are your thoughts? Do you want to be the conflict avoider who lets things build up until eventually they have a blow up, or lets people, or just acts as a doormat for people sometimes and then is secretly resenting them under the surface? Do you want to be a conflict seeker who's always at war in life, and always getting offended and everything's a power struggle and life just never works out the way you want and you suffer with anguish and frustration? Or do you want to be a conflict harmonizer who's just learning how to harmonize with everything that life is throwing at them and constantly trying to seek out the unlearned lessons? What makes the most sense?
Harmonizer for sure.
Oh my gosh, you nailed it. I think that's a good one. But I'd say that whatever one you think makes the most sense, just live it and see how it works out. Okay. Some people will say conflict seekers make the most sense. They're not done their experiment with that category yet. Right. We learn best through experience. So wherever you're at, that's probably the right place to be right now for you. So let's get into some of the causes of conflict, the attitudes behind it. The attitudes behind it. Okay. One of the main causes of conflict, and I heard Napoleon Hill say this once, about 20 years ago. I read the book, I think it was The Master Key to Riches. And he really said it was like forming an opinion without getting the facts straight or without studying the facts, which is really arrogance. So it's being hasty in judgment and quick to condemn, like, or having these secret contracts, these unspoken expectations, acting on bad information, quick, careless, clumsy conclusions, a self-serving bias. That is one of the big causes of conflict, just not getting the facts straight and jumping to these conclusions. What are your thoughts?
I think like even in terms of that, like you're saying causes of conflict, like I know just in my own experience too, there's sometimes where you almost like create a scenario in your head that doesn't even exist. And sometimes it just takes like communicating it, or maybe just, saying it out loud to realize it, or maybe you don't realize it at all. You're just constantly creating those situations. But I can definitely see where that would be dangerous waters.
Oh, you
Right,
nailed it. You nailed it. Yeah, because eventually you start creating this fantasy bubble you're living in, but the rest of reality
right.
isn't. So things are just not working out with the stories you're telling yourself. So, it's like people tend to create problems in their head consistently. And it's like, oh no, I'm
Right.
creating problems in my head again. Like, why do I believe this is true? Where is this a story I'm telling myself, or is this the undeniable truth? Right?
Yeah.
Like that's a good check-in question, right? Because that is a form of self-deception. Love it. Love it. Now, number 2, a cause of conflict is getting addicted to the attention you get through conflict.
Yeah.
So conflict seekers like to seek out conflict because that attracts the enablers into their life, which will comfort, console, and give them what feels like love and attention because they're in a conflict, and usually they'll pitch it as they're the victim when they're the perpetrator so that they can get more love and sympathy, right? And they're addicted to the pain, but they haven't realized that it's low quality. It's based on obligation. It's not like true love. It's just people are obligated to give you that attention, right? Because they're in a desperate situation, and you'd be a jerk not to if somebody's desperate, right? So
Right.
it's really, they've got hooked on that kind of attention. As Tony Robbins said once, their life sucks and they like it that way. So it's kind of perverse, but they push away happiness, because of self-loathing, and then they relish the hidden benefits of this situation. And one thing is that it can bring its own odd satisfaction because there can be a moral superiority that gets reassured. Like, I'm right, other people are wrong. So it gives a little bit of a satisfaction. It gives a little bit of an ego boost, even though you've made up the situation and you've made up the story in your head. And, but it's really like a lot of people like that connection and bonding they get through other people with creating conflict, right?
I guess in that regard too, it's like the quickest dose, but not the most long lasting.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And, there's many ways to get the need for love and connection met. This is somewhat of a destructive strategy, but there's definitely more constructive strategies like helping somebody in need, showing somebody or telling somebody that they matter, expressing gratitude to people, reaching out and just telling people what you appreciate about them. There are so many better methods and strategies. If you're hooked on the attention you get through conflict, maybe it's time to admit it's not working out, and maybe it's time to experiment with some better ways to get what you truly want.
Yeah, for sure.
So number 3 cause of conflict is really selfishness, like only thinking about yourself. Like that's one of the things that, and this can come from a narcissistic viewpoint, which is narcissism is really saying I matter most. That's what narcissism is. So there's a lot of people that like their feelings and their perspective just dominates the whole situation. That's narcissism.
Yeah.
Believing that their feelings are the only things that matter, and then condemning everyone else without taking inventory. Like, how is everyone else doing? What are everyone else's challenges here? Like, just passing on their pain to everyone else, pulling everyone into the drama because they're not happy. Like it's really only thinking about themselves, being consumed with an obsessive self-focus, right? So it's a sunk cost fallacy, you know, or a coup of no hope. They just get attached to this and they're trying to resolve it at the expense of everyone else, right? So a lot of times it's based on ego, that this situation might say something bad about them as a person. And so they really get hyper focused on themselves because they think the ego is everything. And if the ego is threatened, now it's a desperate situation. So it's an emergency, and they escalate the self-importance in it. So, and a lot of times it's like the questions under the surface is like, why is this happening to me? How do I prove to everyone I'm as great as they think? You know, it's like this kind of sign of weakness of the thought process that's really going on behind it. Now, people will do this, okay? People will do this, and it's really a lesson people should learn when they're younger, not to think only about themselves, right? And it's painful when they learn it as an adult, because they'll be socially punished by peers in society for not understanding that you shouldn't think only about yourself, because nobody wants to be around somebody who's that selfish and you know, so, and doesn't consider other people's feelings or situations, right? So it's a very antisocial character quality to nurture, right? So we should instead grow and evolve from it. It's very infantile, right? And egotistical. So if we don't learn it in childhood, it's very painful to learn it as an adult. And apparently, you know, according to Mark Manson, who wrote a book, Everything is Messed Up, I'll just call the book because he used an expletive in the title. But, you know, when parents and teachers fail to teach this, it's because they themselves are stuck at an adolescent level of values. So they think it's normal to just, you know, when you're upset, think only about yourself and disregard others. And so the kid grows up thinking it's normal. So usually it goes back to parenting, thinking only about themselves, right? And I've seen where I've definitely coached people where they either take on this habit because it was kind of like role modeled by a parent, or they noticed that a parent lived this way and they went the complete opposite direction because they were able to connect the dots that that parent is not happy and this is why. They only think about themselves, right? So people usually go one of two ways on that. So that's selfishness, only thinking about themselves. Any thoughts on that category?
Oh, I could see why, like, developing that in childhood and kind of like how that could fester up and build in terms of pain for in adulthood, right? Because it's like the whole world revolves around you, and there's like lack of consideration of others, and that could lead to, you know, end of relationships or things like that, missing connection with people because you've got kind of like that narrow lens, like you said.
Yeah, and I think there might be a fear of not getting your own needs met too that's hinged on this. It's like, well, if I put everyone else first, like I'm going to end up, you know, down and out again and everything else. So there's a fine balance to this, right? It's like you need to have concern for yourself first. You need to have something to give, and then immediately think of the welfare of others. So a lot of times people are making the mistake of not having self-concern, and they only think of the welfare of others and they burn themselves out. And then they let everyone down in the end, you know, because they're giving too much what they don't have, right? And then some people have only self-concern and they don't think of the welfare of others, which is this category. So the fine balance is, you know, you need to do what you need to do for your own survival first, then immediately think of the welfare of others, right? So it needs to be, it's like a bullseye. Self-care, then the welfare of others in your immediate vicinity, and then the welfare of the world, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
So, because that's definitely, you have to tightrope dance that a bit. Now, fourth cause is like ego or pride is bruised. So, you know, people's ego and pride can be very fragile and dependent on life going their way all the time. you know, they turn mountains out of molehills and have these interpretations that they're not good enough. And there's all these unexamined views. They kind of, the underlying a lot of this stuff, you know, there's a lack of confidence. So they lash out at those who injure fragile ego, right? And so a lot of this is driving conflict, protecting, putting so much importance on ego. But it's important for people to realize that they are not their actions. Their actions don't define them. Do not hinge your actions to you. You can change your actions. They aren't the true you. You're a work in progress. You're not done yet. Just embrace humility instead, and complete self-honesty, and just know that, hey, if you know better, you'd have done better. You know, some part of you still thought the ways you acted were a good idea. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. You know, we learn best through direct experience and pain, so it's all good. And everything is just an experiment, and failed experiments give us more memorable lessons on how to learn better or how to live better. So, you know, when ego and pride is involved, there's a lot of blaming. There's a lot of just trying to deny personal responsibility. There's denying guilt, denying fault. And this is really big because eventually when you try to reconcile, if people haven't dropped their ego yet, they will try to apologize in a way that doesn't include any specifics because they're still protecting pride. So they might be like, hey, I'm sorry for my part in what went wrong. Instead of saying like, hey, I'm really sorry that I did this specific thing. I'm really sorry that I told these people bad things about you. I'm really sorry that I betrayed a confident conversation we had or confidential conversation we had. I'm really sorry that I interpreted the worst things about you. Like, really, pride and ego is trying to hide faults and get away with it, right? And that can make true reconciliation very difficult if they're still nurturing the part of them that caused the whole problem in the first place. So a lot of times people have to drop their pride for a true and lasting reconciliation. Otherwise, it's a pseudo reconciliation. It's like painting over dirt. They gave an insincere apology. We agreed. And guess what? We're just waiting for the next drama or conflict to happen because they haven't renounced the behavior and attitudes that caused the problem in the first place. They're hiding it, right? And protecting it. So,
okay.
And I think the key there is to not hinge our self-worth to our actions, because that's where people get into trouble, because they just put so much excess value on their actions. And, you know, there's a lot of egotism to it because they're trying to maintain a perfect image. And the key is like, who are you to think you can actually be perfect and the rest of us are so flawed? Like, there's a lot of egotism behind that, right? It's like, no, you're just as messed up as the rest of us. It's okay. Just admit you made a mistake. Stop trying to maintain this holier than thou impression to the rest of the world. So that's one. And then it causes, number 5 cause would be reactivity, throwing caution and common sense to the wind. It's just like impatience and powerlessness that just leads to an explosion. So there are, you know, people do this for a number of reasons, okay? And I'm going to reference the book, The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. And, you know, a lot of times people will say things like, look, you know, trust your gut, right? Or people will say things like, what feels right? And, you know, Holiday brings to attention the fact that those approaches contradict voluminous case studies in which people's instincts have led them right into trouble. Like, do not put so much weight on your instincts. You know, step back and analyze your own senses, question their accuracy, and proceed only with the positive and constructive ones. Sure, it feels good to like, and it's tempting to, you know, throw discipline and order to the wind and just blow up, you know, but there's many regrets that come from that. And that's what it's shown over time. So a good question to ask is, you know, is my reactivity doing me any good? My reactivity doing me any good? And really the lesson to be learned here is to think before we act. First, realize that reactivity is probably not giving us the benefits we hoped it would. Sometimes it might give you a fleeting, it might ease your mind after you've exhausted yourself blowing up at everybody, right? Maybe it eases your mind for a moment, but really you've just exhausted yourself, right? And you've just created more problems down the road. So does it really do you any good? It's like poisoned honey. It might be sweet to just give people a taste of your mind, but it just destroys your insides, you know, like, so we need to realize that, you know, and ask ourselves, like, are there other possibilities I haven't considered here? You know, learn to pause between stimulus and response. Like, don't just react and jump on the first negative interpretation. Don't tell ourselves we had no choice in the situation, you know, like, well, we need to be able to learn to subjugate our feelings, because it's very weak-willed to just react, right? To not notice what's happening and to misunderstand what's going on. So, you know, a lot of times people react because they think it's admirable to go to war. You know, you're standing up for yourself. That's an underlying attitude that gets people into trouble. Realize it's only admirable to do that when you do it for the right reasons. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, it's not admirable, right? It's like, you know, because a lot of times people will think reactivity and doing this stuff is a sign of strength. And it's like, no, only if you're standing up for the right reasons. And most of the times people are doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it for, you know, ego or arrogance or selfish focus or whatever, right? So those are some of the causes behind conflict. Any thoughts on those underlying attitudes?
Well, reactivity, like the one that you just brought up, I think like stepping back is a really powerful tool, and actually asking questions, because I know for me, speaking towards like myself, I know sometimes I don't really question myself enough, like in terms of like, is this serving me? Right? Like, is this reaction serving me? Because I think at the end of the day, even taking that extra minute, you quickly do realize those things. And I think, I just think that's a very powerful tool, and I know it's worked for me. I just I can see where that would be pivotal.
Okay, perfect. So let's discuss some of the roadblocks to conflict resolution. So one thing that's very common to people trying to resolve a conflict, they'll do everything except what is needed to resolve it, right? They'll delay and distract, you know? So they just don't do it right. They might do everything but focus on it. Right now, the longer you wait, the more your beliefs can get hardened, whether those beliefs are right or wrong. So it's better to resolve things right away, because lies that we tell ourselves for long enough eventually become accepted as deep truths. However, reality always wins. So if you have told yourself some lies and they become accepted as deep truths, you'll notice there's a big gap between how you think things should be in reality and how things actually are. Like, why are people distancing themselves from me and stuff? Like, maybe I've told myself lies so long that I've just brainwashed myself into thinking I'm innocent when I'm really guilty of some things I haven't taken ownership of, or I haven't taken personal responsibility for. Reality always wins in the end, right? So a lot of times, because of ego, people want to do the comfortable thing instead of the right thing. And the right thing is often to drop the ego. The uncomfortable stuff is what helps us learn and grow the most. Pain is where breakthroughs happen. Don't try to do the comfortable thing when it comes to, there's going to be pain either way. You might as well have the pain of doing the right thing. You know, don't shrink away from facing uncomfortable truths, right? So be interested in what is right, not what feels right. Don't vilify discomfort. So a lot of times people will just refuse to participate in their self-understanding. They'll refuse to participate in their self-correction, and they will refuse to participate in their self-improvement. So, but that is usually what's needed. And they'll do everything but that, right? Like, they'll say whatever words they've been told to say to try to resolve it, or they'll try to, you know, act like nothing happened and try to get away with some things some damage they've caused. So that's one. Doing everything but the right thing. Another is indulging in guilt. indulging in guilt, like, guilt doesn't make things any better, right? What purpose does guilt really have? It's once again, it's a distraction. It's not the same thing as changing, and it lets you off the hook because it feels like you've done work. It's like, no, you haven't done any work. You just punished yourself without going anywhere. It's like punching yourself in the face. You haven't really accomplished anything. Just because it feels like you did something doesn't mean it, right? So people might go through, weeks and months groaning about their troubles, but, go within and really resolve this at the source. So that's a big one. I think, unwillingness is a big one. People won't participate in their own progress and self-improvement. Immaturity makes us want what we want when we want it. And so people don't want to do the work, and that's really an immaturity thing. And unwillingness is the primary obstacle in our failure to progress. People do not want to learn the unlearned lessons, so and then they end up in like just a bit of a standstill attitude, like nothing is moving forward. And it just comes down to unwillingness. So another thing can be no ability. Okay. So, they might not be capable of living by noble principle because of, maybe there's something neurologically wrong or biochemically wrong, or, their physiology might be compromising them. And they just might not have the capacity to understand what's going on. Right. So that could be one. Another thing could be a communication gap. We haven't brought the whole picture to them in a way that they understand. Right. We have to put the idea in front of people in a way that they'll understand and get behind it. So sometimes there's a communication gap. Right. A lot of times it's a consciousness gap, though. Their version of reality is very different. Their version of reality is that they're the center of the universe, and they're not willing to give that up, right? So certainly people are the center of their experience of the universe. So it's natural that a lot of them will think they're the center of the universe, right? And so that's in their consciousness, the way things operate. And usually we just have to give people time and just know that life will be their master disciplinarian and help them get that attitude in line through pain and disappointment and frustration until they are humbled and they're willing to see things different. So yeah, people just need clarity and stuff. And then a lot of times people are indulging in bad influences. They're listening to the wrong people. They're taking advice from somebody who's more confused than they are. A lot of times people seek advice only from those who strengthen their wrong attitude rather than those who will help them find the right attitude. It just makes things messier. So, they'll attract enablers who are complicit and will buy into their stories, victimhood stories, and strengthen them that they're right and everyone else is wrong. And so that can be a big cause of it, a roadblock. A big roadblock to reconciliation is, burying the hatchet while there's still blood on it. So it's kind of like a forced reconciliation, where people have not transformed yet. It's trying to do the outward things of reconciliation without the inward transformation. The problem is not really solved. Okay.
I see. Yeah.
And that comes from Peace Pilgrim, actually talked about that a bit in her book. So here's the thing, and Asha Nayaswamy says this: cut the tumor out, don't just put a Band-Aid over it. Cut the tumor out, and the tumor is going to be an attitude that's wrong, right? So there's an attempt to, oftentimes in this case, there's an attempt to achieve a premature or haphazard harmony. Freud once said that, a thing that has not been understood inevitably reappears like an unlaid ghost. It'll just reappear. It cannot rest until the mystery has been solved and the spell broken. Sigmund Freud. So we don't want to just say like forgive and forget when the transformation hasn't happened, because what we've done is we've protected, I'm going to use evil as a term, to represent mistaken direction that just leads to more harm. We want a good thing maybe, but the direction we take leads to more harm. We call that evil. Okay, so evil is protected when we take this approach, right? Evil is protected. It's just like kind of like pretend it didn't happen. Well, now you're giving strength to evil. The only way we can banish the darkness is to shed some light into it. And that requires complete honesty over what happened and so that proper transformation can take place, right? Make right any of the wrongs, learn from what happened so you can be better rather than deny what happened and try to move past it, right? So a lot of times people take this approach. It's very popular. They just try to like, let's just move on and forget nothing happened. And then it's like the same problem comes back with ever greater intensity. And people get steeped in their delusions, right? So that can be definitely a roadblock. A lot of the roadblocks can be self-deception. People exaggerate, embellish, or bend the truth, tell themselves a story and pretend something else is true. You know, they claim they don't remember. A lot of times people will say they don't remember things because it's too painful to remember. So it's that's what they will do, is they'll insist on denying it despite all the evidence and use a lot of self-justification. They confuse their opinions for facts. They confuse their feelings for facts, you know, or they might, you know, the key thing is when ego gets involved, people make terrible decisions and they often make things worse, not better.
Yes.
Right? So we want to think we instead of me, because when we think me, that leads to villain behavior. People can become unkind. They can plot revenge. They can, you know, break agreements. They can badmouth, backstab, persecute, blame, right? So here's a quick resolution. Here's how we can create quick resolution when it comes to conflict, okay? Step one, you know, just tell somebody, I'm here to help. Are you okay if we speak freely about some concerns I have so I can understand you better? Are you willing to figure out the things we each have to do to be okay? So step one is just show you're here to help. Step two is, you know, first of all, let me come clean with some stuff I could have done better, right? Now, and be honest here, I could have expressed my needs better. You know, I gave people too much expectation on how they would think and act. You know, I thought people would be more advanced than they were in a few areas. You know, maybe I didn't foresee things going this way in advance and I could have prepared better in advance. You know, we have to be honest with our part in things, right? So, and then we could just say to somebody, you know, please let me know if there's anything I missed that you want to add to this. Please tell me what you think is what's going on. What's your perspective on this, right? So that's step two. Step three would be, do you actually want this resolved? And if so, do you want it resolved the right way? Because a lot of times people want it resolved their way, which is like win-lose, right?
Which isn't always the right way, yes.
No, and they will force that. And so sometimes, and then you got to know that now is not the right time. Just be like a dog, just go away, right? Until they come back to their senses. You know, the right way requires complete self-honesty. So we can, you know, we can say, are you going to be real? Can you be real with me? Are you willing to be completely honest and truthful? Because we have to accept responsibility for a situation before we can solve it. You know, true solutions require true information on what actually happened. So then, you know, step four is you could actually highlight the behavior that needs to be addressed. Did you do this? Okay, whatever it is, right? So you need to get clear on that behavior. And sometimes you need to retrace your steps and figure out where you made a wrong turn in the whole situation. We need to understand the true cause. Where exactly did things go wrong? Let's retrace your steps. We had this conversation. We agreed we would circle back. Then something bad happened. All of a sudden, you're telling all these people this thing. At what point did you take a wrong turn? You made a decision at one point, right? What went through your mind as you made that decision? You have to realize that, because that's where the key learning lesson is. That's where the tumor is. And you got to cut it out. You can't just put a Band-Aid over it or pretend you forgot about it or whatever, right? And then you got to say, you know, like, why was that a bad idea? That's the next step. Why was that a bad idea? How did it work? What were the consequences? Can you see the trouble it brought? So people need to, actually see that it was a mistaken direction for whatever good intent they might have had. And you might say, why did you do it? What was the attitude behind it? What good did you hope to gain? Give people benefit of the doubt that ultimately they tried to maintain some good. Maybe they just wanted self-respect so they can do good in the world and this and that. And they thought, I got to do this. I'm in survival mode right now, right? But I just say, take me through each decision, explain the thought process. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why was this more important than that? Why was this decision more important than other people, and this and that, right? So then you can just say, look, step 7 is this what you stand for? Can you see how this outcome contradicts your good intentions? Is this the person you want to be? Just see that they make the connection. If not, you can say, well, here's how I see it, and here's how others see it. And you can help to highlight that, right? And then step 8 is, have you learned anything? What's a better way to be in future? What could you consider in future, right? And then step 9 is, how do you propose we make things better? You're in control of where things go from here. You decide what will change. You have all the power. How can I best support you? Right? So,
Right.
And then, so that's like a quick process if you're to have a conversation or anything to try to resolve things. But if you want to be loving and compassionate, and if it doesn't work, you gotta love from a distance, because people might not be ready for change, and you don't have to accept the collateral damage of their present state of development. But just know that it is a present state of development. Everybody's a work in progress, right? And you don't have to get drawn into that negativity and drama, so, and we want to take our own responsibility. Have I changed and evolved? Have I corrected my own faults yet? We want to be able to check, do I have compassion for the confused? Am I peaceful right now? Am I ready to return love for hate? Is my intention to transform? Am I focused on principles instead of people? Is my goal to resolve conflict, not to gain advantage? Can I keep my own ego out of it? Have I seen the best in them? Can I see their divine spark? Am I following the will of the creator? Try to stay anchored in these harmonious principles. Pick a good time to discuss it, and ultimately we want to begin with what's our fault. We want to help them feel understood in this process. And then, and we want to just get some clarity on where things went wrong, right? And usually it's an attitude that needs to be uprooted. And then when it comes to making amends, you might talk about what they're doing well. You might talk about what you think you're doing well and what you would enjoy more of, or what would make you happy, or if action is needed, what action is needed, and appeal to their self-interest here. You can say, don't do this because it won't work out and people won't trust you, or it leads to lots of consequences. Or you can say, it's in your best interest maybe to do this next time so people will trust you more. Like, really appeal to their self-interest, because that's how most people will respond. Make sure you record the conversation or take notes.
Yeah.
And because, sometimes they might gaslight you on it and say that other things were said in that conversation. If they're not ready to resolve things, they might try to retroactively make up things that happened in the past that didn't really happen. And then they might not change, right? Like, they might either demonstrate they aren't ready through excuses and denial. They might try to take an easy way out or a shortcut and be like, I've changed the light, or I've seen the light, I'm a changed person. Now, if somebody says that, there's 5 things that need to be satisfied to reconcile. Truly, if somebody's done some really bad things, okay, and you're not sure whether you should let down your guard, there's 5 things to ask. 1, have they shown remorse? Yes or no? If they haven't shown remorse, then chances are they're just being manipulative and trying to get something they want, right? 2, have they admitted their fault with specifics? They need to be specific, okay? 3, have they identified concrete personal changes? Okay. 4, have they taken any action that demonstrates a changed heart? Whether that's making amends, personal therapy, sobriety, anything, going back and clarifying the truth. And if you've tarnished or discredited somebody, restoring their good name, whatever, right? 5, has a significant amount of time passed before demonstrating the changed patterns. So those are 5 things, and that comes from a textbook from a really successful therapist. I forget her name off the top of my head, but those are the 5 things that, so that you can be like, okay, if they say they've changed and we're really good now, where are they at 1 to 5, right? A lot of times you're going to find it's like there's only one of these variables satisfied. So that is kind of like, so that is something to consider there, is because a lot of times people will think something is resolved and it hasn't really been resolved yet. So those are some tips on conflict harmonizing, you know? And I think the only real failure is failure to stick to true and virtuous principles, right? So sometimes we don't get what we want. Sometimes we have to give people space to learn and grow through hard experience. And sometimes we can harmonize by together, you know, it's us and them. And then there's this pattern that didn't work out. We should try to cooperate with them to understand and overcome and transcend this pattern, and just treat conflict harmony is all about us needing everyone's participation to recognize that pattern like it's a third party entity that we all stick together and try to overcome, right? A lot of times people think resolving conflict is all about you against me, and it shouldn't be that, and we shouldn't tell ourselves that. So any key takeaways?
Well, in terms of like conflict, I think it's important to kind of maybe understand where your stance is currently, like in terms of, are you conflict seeking? Do you want to be conflict harmonizing? And just kind of seeing that middle ground. But then also, I think another really big takeaway is just like also being able to like take that step back and evaluate yourself and say, like, is this currently working for me? And if not, like, how can I be better, or how can I make it better in terms of like resolving, you know, things properly and progressing in this lifetime.
Exactly. And be patient with people. You know, as Swami Kriyananda once said, you know, it takes incarnations to emerge from the pit of delusion, right? So people might take a long time to overcome one major flaw. So just be patient with people and remember their highest potential. We're all in this schoolhouse of life, just learning the skills for right living so we can become strong warriors in the battle of life. And this is one of the ways to do it. All right, go team on 3. You ready?
Here we go.
1, 2, 3, go team.
Go team. Thanks, Brennan.